On this episode of the Happy Holy Hour, we interview Sarah and her personal testimony of the painful effects of abortion and the healing and forgiveness she found in the gospel. Tyler, this one was a doozy. This one was really powerful, and
yeah, it absolutely was. And it presents a side of this picture. We always hear of abortion, right? But we only ever hear about it in the political sphere. So this interview today, this story was phenomenal because it really presents the other side of the story and the testimony of someone who actually went through this and not only went through an abortion, but found healing with the gospel. So it's an amazing story. You're not going to miss it.
From going leading up to the abortion, going through the abortion, what she had to deal with after the abortion, which is super important, and then ultimately finding forgiveness and hope in the gospel. Guys, you do not want to miss this episode.
Join us on the Happy Holy Hour. Welcome to the Happy Holy Hour, a podcast where everyday Christians grow in their faith through biblical examination and insightful discussion. I'm glad you're here today. If you enjoy the content you're about to hear, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and visit us at thehappyholyhour.org. Let's get started.
Well, hey everyone, welcome back to the Happy Holy Hour. This is episode number 71. I'm Travis. I'm here with my co-host Tyler, and we actually have a very special guest with us, Sarah. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm good. Thanks for asking.
Well, Sarah, you have a really important story to share with us, and we actually made kind of a random connection on Facebook when I posted into a Facebook group. We were looking for some people to come on who could speak to us, who had a personal experience with abortion, who worked in that field of ministry as a lobbyist or activist or with counseling. And you were gracious enough to respond, as well as many others. I was really blown away by the amount of people who offered to come on. It's always shocking, people who you've never really met us in person, and yet you're willing to share your story. And we're really privileged to be able to use this platform to have you come on and share your story with us. But before we kind of dig into your story a little bit, can you just share a little bit about yourself for our listeners to get to know us, just some general information?
I live in Lexington, and I moved up here, in 2016. And I'm also a student part-time, going to school for communications, specializing in healthcare. So there's not a lot of time outside of work and school, but, the time that I do have is precious, and I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're excited to have you on. I can respect all of those hard things you're working on right now. My wife is a nurse. She's going back part-time online. She's going to school, working, and is a mom of two. So a lot in common there. That's a lot of work, a lot of respect points right there.
Yeah.
I spent a semester. I lived in Florida for a semester. That's the extent of my time down in Florida, but I enjoyed it. For some reason, I ended up back up north, but I'm considering the South more and more. The older I get, the more and more I'm like, I could do without the cold weather.
You're going to be one of those snowbirds.
Yeah. You didn't run into the Florida crazy man, did you?
No, well, I don't know. I have a brother-in-law down there, and he might count as a Florida crazy man, but is that like a local legend or myth? You can tell we're not really.
They're all over. It's just anytime there's a news story, it always seems to happen in Florida.
Like the Florida man who's like out there Florida with his Confederate flag, like doing the helicopter with his hair out in the hurricane. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's classic Florida. I don't know if that's a stereotype or not, or if that's just how it is down there, but that's what I think of when I think of Florida, is Florida man.
It's crazy down there. Yeah, it's a different world.
Well, Sarah, not to do a huge pivot here, but like I mentioned earlier, when I made that post, we're looking for people who had a personal experience with abortion, and you actually commented saying you had an abortion at one point. Would you be willing to, as much as you're comfortable, sharing some of your personal experience with abortion, starting off with what were the circumstances that led up to that point? Kind of give us the backstory a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So back in 2016, I did not have any kind of relationship with Christ or anything like that. So for me, this was like pre-relationship with Christ. So let me go kind of way back. I was raised in the Church of Christ, and then I graduated high school from a Southern Baptist private school. I was baptized when I was like 7, and there was no fruit really. Like there was this thing that I did in the church, and then all of these years went by, and I didn't really, consider myself like somebody who kept going to church and who just had this walk with Christ and all of this. A little backstory too. After that, I struggled with a substance abuse addiction, and I got sober when I was 26. And so, like, in that time of sobriety, I'm doing all of these things. I'm a sober person, but I'm still, in the world, like doing all this worldly stuff. And I got with this guy, and, turns out if you have sex, you can get pregnant. It was a shock to me when I found out that I was pregnant. I don't know if either of you have planned both of your pregnancies, but to have a surprise pregnancy is really scary, and it's it's a really hard thing to face. In 2016, with this guy, and I find out that I'm pregnant. He was also in recovery, and at this time, he's going through a lot of stuff, and he relapses. He goes off, and he's wanting me to keep the child and all this stuff, but in my head, I'm like, I have no support to keep this child. I had just moved to Kentucky, and so I didn't really have family around. I had a few friends, and I'm looking at this like I've just traveled across the United States. I have no support, and the father of the baby is out getting high, using drugs, and I wasn't connected to a church. I just felt so much fear. Like if I didn't take care of this problem right away, I wasn't going to be able to do anything else. So it was a lot of fear driven, and I went back and forth with him, and I finally came to the conclusion that I was going to have an abortion. Now, I had always looked at abortion like I would never do it, and I think that's how a lot of people look at abortion, is that they would never do it. But when you're put in that situation and circumstances around you are just terrible, you start to question that. And, I knew about God, I knew about the Bible, I knew about all that stuff. But when it was my turn and I was the one who was pregnant, a lot of me didn't want to do it. But the other side of me was questioning how I'm going to take care of this child with no support around me, was, just did not feel like I was in the right spot situation to have it. And I think that's what a lot of the lies that women believe is that, you're not going to be able to do it. You're not going to be able to take care of this child on your own. You're not going to have the support that you need. And that was the two biggest lies that I believed. And I call them lies because my life has just turned out beautifully. And I know that like God can make provision through all of that, so that's why I call them lies, is because that's what society wants you to believe, is that, if you don't have support, then sure, why not? Go ahead. So I started Googling places, that I can go and have this procedure done. Like I didn't know anything about abortion. And when that happens to you, you are like in this, I've got to take care of this crisis right away. Like it is the only thing that you think about. And so I started finding places, and there was only one place in Kentucky to do it. And one of the places that popped up was called Assurance for Life. I did not know that this place was not an abortion center. But when you Google the search word abortion, this pro-life crisis pregnancy center has like a geofence around this word. Mm-hmm. So when you type it in, their place pops up. So I went there, and I was very frustrated with them because I didn't know that it was a place that was going to counsel me. It was, a crisis pregnancy center, and it was Christian based. And I ended up getting an ultrasound from them and having some counseling with a woman there. I was about 7 weeks. And so I went to this place in Louisville, and I Googled them before I went down there, and just to see like what everything was going to be like. And a lot of the things that I've seen scared me because you've got people out there who are protesting. It's an offensive place to be at to begin with. There's a lot of charged up energy, and you've got this sect who doesn't want you to do it, and then you've got the place. And so I Googled that, and I think I even wore like a hoodie, and I found this place to park and walked across the street. One of the escorts from the center came out, and she helped me across the street. And I went inside the building, and I walked past all of the protesters. And at this point, you're so scared because that it's wrong. And the only thing you can see is that I'm going to have relief. I'm going to, things are going to be normal again. And so you go in, and I don't know if any of your listeners have been to jail, but with my history, I have. And walking inside of that abortion clinic looks like a jail. They say that it's this center for women. There's no pictures on the wall. It's just this bare place. You go in, you put your cash out in front of the person, and you go have a seat in the waiting room. And you're sitting in this big empty waiting room that's not you think of a women's center and you think of flowers and pink and, something that's comforting. And this place wasn't like that. So you go in there, and you're sitting there with all of these other people who are going to do the same thing. And then they take a group back, and they do this little video that you have to do under Kentucky law now, that if you want to get an abortion, the abortion facility has to show you a video and counsel you. And that's just another barrier to try and prevent more people from getting an abortion if they do this video at the facility. And we leave that room, and they usher all of us back into another room. And then you sit there and wait, and then they start pulling you in one by one, and they start giving you abortion or ultrasounds. Another thing that you have to do in Kentucky is to show the person an ultrasound, and that's another way to try and prevent somebody from having an abortion. So I sit there, and they do the ultrasound, and then they take me back out of the room, and I decided to do the pill abortion. And you go into another room, and a doctor comes in, and she talked to me for a second, and then she gave me a pill. And so I took that, and I leave the facility and get in my vehicle, and I'm driving, and I was like, oh, a sigh of relief. I can breathe. I came up here to do all of this stuff when I moved here, and now I'm finally going to be able to do it. There's nothing else going on. And I don't know, a few days later, I take the second pill, I think 12 or 24 hours later. And one of the pills starts the process, and then the other one expedites it. So I'm like actively having the abortion. And you're just like supposed to just go about your daily life, and you're actively having the procedure. And, it was very painful. And I was going to get my kids the night that it started happening. And so I'm in excruciating pain, and I'm going to pick up my children and stop at this restroom to use the bathroom. And, I feel like that is where I actually lost the baby. And so I just went on, I just put my blinders on and kept on going to pick up my children, and got back home and took care of things with them. And that pretty much sums up the abortion part. But every time I would drive past that gas station, I would like immediately have PTSD. Like, just either I would start sobbing, or it would just totally knock me off the rails, like every single time. Like I would know that gas station's coming up, and that I'm not going to be able to make it. I need to call somebody or get on the phone with somebody, because just the attachment that I had towards that gas station. A woman can make life and she can take it, and that is the most unnatural thing that I have ever done in my life, ever. And that thought just resonates with me, because it is so unnatural. Like, God did not design for that to happen, ever. And so I started having like that PTSD, and then I just became so angry. I felt like I had just bought into this huge lie. The abortion industry is telling you that you are going to take care of your problem. They don't tell you what happens to you after you do that. I started just having like nightmares, anxiety. The anger was like the biggest thing for me, because I was angry at the father of the baby, angry at myself, angry at people who had babies, angry at the abortion industry, the church. I was just so angry. I don't think I've ever been more angry in my life. And that's like the most uncomfortable emotion for me to deal with.
Going back a little bit to, what you were going through, what was going through your head as you were thinking about getting an abortion, as you were getting an abortion, because you said, these are lies that now you realize they're lies, but back then you also said you had some feeling that this was wrong. So were you battling with this to try to justify it and kind of putting these thoughts off that it was wrong, or are you pretty determined at that point that no, this is the only option, and whether that's out of desperateness of, I feel like this is the best thing for the child, or this is the best thing for me or my kids and my family. Can you just kind of explain some of that? Like, because you said, you felt like this is wrong in one sense, and yet, you were believing these lies, but were you really believing them, or do you trying to justify those lies and convince yourself that that was reality?
Yeah. So I just felt like I had to just put it out, like out of sight, out of mind, like put it in a compartment. Just don't ever think about it. Just do it and like be done with it. So in my mind, it was like, if you just don't think about it, like, nothing will happen. Like you won't have to deal with it anymore. And that was like the angle that I was taking with that.
You mentioned because you went to a pregnancy crisis center, a pro-life pregnancy crisis center, and you got an ultrasound, and then there were people with signs protesting outside the abortion clinic. And those are some of the typical things you hear about people who are pro-life doing, kind of those obstacles in the way of getting an abortion. Did you find that helpful, harmful? Did that sway you one way or the other? Because some people are very strong opinionated, either way, like we have to do these things, or this is the answer, or no, this is a terrible thing to do, depending on which side you're talking to. Like, what was it for you being a person who was thinking about getting an abortion? Because that's not a perspective we always get to hear.
I want to mention that because I felt more comfort from the people at the abortion facility. Like, and we, like, as Christians, like, I feel like that's where we're failing. Like, I felt like they comforted me so much more than the Christians on the outside of the facility. Like, even though I was going there to do that, like, we've got to come up with some other way to do this, because I'm looking at them like they're the bad people. Because like nobody like reached out to me or like made eye contact with me or like said anything. It was more of like, I'm going to sit outside of this abortion center with this picture of a fetus and like, and just call you like a killer and all of these things. So yeah, like I wanted to avoid those people like at all costs because I felt judged. I mean, and I by all means, like, yes, it is a very judging thing, you know, but like for a woman going through that, I feel like the abortion industry should not be the one making the woman feel more comfortable than the body of the church.
Yeah. And
I would imagine that would almost make, like, obviously I've never been in that situation, but my personality type is like, if they're yelling at me to do one thing, I'm going to do the opposite thing just because of out of my rebellious spirit. I feel like that would be a challenge having to deal with that.
Well, that's one thing I was thinking about too, is that for me is a little frustration there, because I think from Christians looking in on this situation, I think we struggle with like, what do we do? What are the tangible things we can do? Like, how else can we? And especially since there are some safeguards and regulations on what you can do to protest or to try to speak biblical truth. And I think one thing we'll get to hopefully later is how do we speak biblical truth in this situation where we have to say, like, and not compromise the truth. This is wrong. This is murder. And at the same time, show God's love and share the gospel and the hope in that. And we'll get to that in this episode. But especially when it comes to the protesting and different things like that, do you think it was just the fact that they were there, or was it more of how they were conducting themselves where they're there? I guess as people who are thinking about protesting or who are like, do you think the whole thing in and of itself was offensive, or just the way they were caring about themselves as they were there protesting?
So I had already watched videos on YouTube, and this is a pretty charged place. And so I had already seen that, and there's so much shame around. Well, I guess some people don't have shame, but for me, there was so much shame, you know, and that goes back to like me just wanting to just put it out of sight, out of mind, you know, because I knew it was wrong. But when you go there, it's like they're not there to help you. They're just there to prove a point. Like, we're just going to stand here and quote scripture and like make you feel like garbage, you know? And then you have a person from the abortion facility who comes around and puts their arm around you and is like, okay, it's going to be all right now, you know, and they lead you away from the people who are, you know, out there doing that.
And I know, because I looked it up, our local, there's several clinics around, but there's only one in our immediate area that does the actual surgical abortions, or I think the pill as well. And on their website, they even talked about that, warning people, you know, of these, and they of course framed them in a very negative light. You know, there's probably going to be protesters and this, got to watch out for them and different things, which could or could not be true, but you definitely get that message from the other side. So you're going to have come with these preconceived ideas. And then it might have been, in your case, even reinforces that was what they were doing. So I think you, they're already kind of in a losing battle a little bit, because whether or not they're doing things out of love or there for the right reasons or are conducting themselves well, people who come in are already going to have a preconceived idea of what they're going to be acting like, maybe.
I think the solution to like the protests isn't even about the protest. I think it happens in the church as like a preventative, but like somehow there's got to be a segue between people who want to get abortions and like the church. But I want to go back to the place that I went to that was pro-life. I would say a few months into me, like after my procedure, they were calling me to check on me. And I knew it was them calling, and I'd never answer. I was like, I'm just so angry. I want to put this behind me. I don't want to deal with this. Why do they keep calling me? And finally I answered the phone, and the woman, she goes, just checking on you, and wanted to let you know that we have a class coming up, and it is a post-abortive class. Hmm. And I said, well, I don't know. Let me think about it. I'll call you back or whatever. And I ended up going to this class, and I went there with just the weight of the world on me, just the loss of the relationship, the loss of the baby, the move, everything was just this. 2016 was not my year. So I go there, and it's a ministry, and the woman who founded the book is her name is Pat Layton, and it's Surrender the Secret. And like that's what it is for a lot of women, is like the secret that they have. We had a woman in our class who was like in her 70s. Wow. And she had an abortion like 40 or 50 years ago. And she was in the church, and it just always stuck with her, and she needed healing. And so I walked into class the first night, and, I was like, I'm never going to feel better. Like, I'm just accepting that this is how I'm always going to feel. I'm always going to feel anger at myself, shame, anxiety, you name it. And you go through the book. It's an 8-week course. And like the first week is just about getting to know like the other women and hear their stories. And the next class is on like facing the truth. And one of the things that they did was they brought in these baby models, and they're doing this in love. Like it is like just full of love. And none of it's like condemnation or anything. And we're going through this book, and we're saying scriptures out loud and all this stuff. And like, that's when like things started changing for me, like slowly but surely. Like I'm leaving class every night feeling a little bit better because I'm hearing the gospel, like I'm reading these verses out loud, and like I'm hearing it, and I'm just seeing these people who are leading this ministry, and they bring in these babies, and we start just talking about like the statistics, and like this really is life, and then we move to the next week, and that week is about anger, and everybody gets to do this anger class, and everybody in there was angry. All of the women, they all felt like they had just all, like we had all been deceived, and I keep saying that because that's just really what it is. Like if you look at what's going on in the world today, and you look at like what the abortion industry tells women, like we'll take care of your problem. And like God really showed up for me. Like I had this supernatural experience, and I'm laying there in the bed, and I'm crying, I'm boo-hooing, and I just feel this like peace come into the room, and it just like washed over me. And I'm laying there, and like I feel like 2 hands on my stomach, and it was just the most sweetest, kindest, most peaceful feeling that I had ever felt. And I had never been able to get that experience. Like I had never been able to have that kind of joy, that kind of peace, love. And I felt it like it was just, I felt it on my stomach like it was just healing me. like, I wish it would have lasted forever, you know, and it subsides and I'm having this very intense healing session and you know, I go back to class the next week and I'm like, I gotta tell you guys what happened. And, you know, and it was like like what I felt was the most wonderful first experience that I had with the Lord. You know, I ended up going through that class and finishing at the end. And, you know, we do everything in that class. Like um, like give the babies a proper burial at the very end, like a ceremony, a memorial. So we like acknowledge that like this was a life. And, you know, like these little old women, they knit these little baby dolls. And, you know, we go into the room and we write our children letters and we hold these little baby dolls and acknowledge them. And so I ended that class and, you know, I felt great. Like I felt like, here's the thing. People say, forgive yourself, you know, and, that was a foreign concept to me because I didn't know how. I'm like, how do I forgive me? Like, how do I let myself off the hook for this? You know, and the class was just talking about like the gospel and, you know, that's Jesus took on all of this because I said, you know, I can never forgive myself for this. But we were sitting in the class and that scripture, 1 John 1:9, if you confess your sins, God is faithful and just to forgive us and to cleanse us of all unrighteousness. And that clicked for me. I accept forgiveness from God. You know, like I don't forgive myself for this. Like, I accept it from him. And so, man, like I finished that class and, you know, I didn't think I would hear from that ministry again, but they reached out to me and, asked me if I wanted to help them share, to co-lead the classes. And so I've done that and I've, you know, processed this so much and have talked about it.
God is so gracious. I love that not only did he, you know, work in you, but he also is working through you to reach other people. And I love how God works, right? He always works in these ways that you don't really ever expect him to, but that's such an amazing story.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up what you had to deal with after the abortion, because you don't hear about that often, especially in politics. Sometimes you don't hear about what happens to these women and what they have to go through post-abortion. Can you, I mean, I know you have somewhat in your story. Can you just contrast some of what you were feeling, the emotions and feelings you had before coming to the gospel and understanding the gospel after the abortion, and then coming to understand the gospel? Can you like maybe contrast some emotions there?
Oh, tremendously, you know, and I felt like it was just God put me in Lexington for a reason. Like I was not trying to move to Lexington. Okay. My plan was to move to northern Kentucky, like Cincinnati area. And this was the first place that I found a job. But God, in all of his mercy, knew that Sarah was going to mess up and Sarah was going to need a ministry that was going to reach out to her, because I don't think they have a lot of these ministries all over the place. I don't know if there's one up in Cincinnati or northern Kentucky, but he knew that I was going to mess up, and this was set up for me, and it just like unfolded in such a beautiful way, because when the first night I walked into the class, I was just, you could not have convinced me that I was going to have healing. I would just thought that I was just going to be like this for the rest of my life. So just hearing the scriptures and just seeing Christ in others and having the love and the compassion and the understanding and all of that just really helped me understand who God was. Because like I said, like growing up, being baptized at 5 years old, I didn't have a walk with the Lord. Like, I feared God, but I never had that, like, hey, I love you so much that I just want to sit here with you and spend time with you kind of thing, you know? And so after I did that ministry and all of that, I was like, hey, I need to go back to church. You know, I really feel like it's just pulling, you know, like the Lord just like pulls you. Like, you know, one morning I said, you know, when I go to church today, I think I'm going to get baptized. And so I'm sitting in the back row again. And the sermon that he preached that day was called Just Say Yes. And I was like, okay, like, you know, like, maybe that's not a sign. I don't know. I felt led to be in that building, and I felt led to sit there in that sermon. And then I went to the back afterwards, and I'm talking to this elder, and we are in this room, and I'm crying. You know, things have just been a lot different. But like doing that ministry, you know, it cut off when COVID started. And I was telling a friend of mine like a month ago that, you know, I really wanted to get back into being in the trenches and, you know, doing this abortion stuff. You know, I really wish there was a way that churches could work with these organizations. So like if a woman is wanting to get an abortion, she would have all the resources at a church. You know, every reason that she thinks she needs to have this abortion, a church could step in and say, hey, you know, we've got you covered. You don't have money. You don't have family. You don't have X, Y, and Z. Like, we can come around you and walk beside you through this. A lot of women, they get the abortion because there's just like the man's not around, or they don't have the support. You know, there's the financial support and then the family support.
That's a really good point you brought up, and something Tyler and I have talked about often is what's the role of the local church in these issues. So often it's, you know, is it the government's role or not? And people don't ask the question, you know, where does the church come into this, and how can we come alongside? Like you said, there's no reason that a local church can't supply and meet all those needs. And all those reasons that the woman is thinking, I can't have this baby, I have to get an abortion, the church could step in there and say, hey, whatever your needs are, we can meet them and we can walk with you through this. Because certainly, you know, we don't want to whitewash it. I mean, being a single mom, it's me and my wife, it's hard having kids. You know, I can't imagine what that would be like going through that. And I'd love to see the local church do more. And I think above average Christians do more, but sometimes it's more on an individual level, and praise God for that. You know, I think we are called as individuals to intervene here, but how can the local church come together and do something? Hopefully we'll see more of that in the future. But what a powerful testimony of just the transformation of the gospel and the hope and forgiveness that we have in Jesus Christ. And I think that was one thing when I posted that, asking for people to share on Facebook, I got several comments or private messages saying, you need to, you know, make sure you highlight the hope we have. And because I think people need to hear it. Everybody needs to hear it. Even Christians, we need to preach it to ourselves. But, you know, those who are thinking about getting abortion or have gone through abortion or are arguing that it's okay to have abortion, and even those who are pro-life, we all need to hear the gospel shared. And I think that has come through very clearly in your story. How, in light of everything you've gone through, I'm wondering if you can just help us wrestle with a couple questions, because like you said, it's a very charged subject. It's a very sensitive subject, and it can be difficult for us, especially as Christians, because we do view it so strongly. You know, we do believe there's a biblical truth here and that it is wrong. And yet these people are very much hurting and broken, and there is a lot of deception there. And I guess the first question I have is, how do we find that balance? How do we not compromise on the truth, and how do we call it for what it is and what the Bible says it is, and say that it is wrong and it is murder and it is these things that God proclaims, and yet how do we do it with love, and how do we love these people and come alongside of them? And I think that's your frustration that you shared there, and that's mine as well, as someone who's looked into this and really, confessing that I probably should do more than I have. But coming to this, it's hard to know, how do I even start? How do I start ministering to these people and proclaim the truth, and yet do it in love, and do it in a way that's not counterproductive and harmful?
It's really hard to talk to people who just believe that it's not a baby, like, until it's born. I think it's really sad that you can murder a woman who's pregnant and get like double homicide, but then you give the woman that same choice, that it's her body and that she can do what she wants with it. That's a really touchy subject. I have been on Facebook groups where people are posting things about having the right to do it. And I get so caught up in that because I just want everyone to know that it's a lie. Like, you're probably not going to feel better after you do it. And that's a baby. I don't know. Like, I really don't know what the answer is to that. I think that loving others and loving them when they make that decision. Yeah, I don't know if I would have done anything different, like with mine. Had I felt like enough support around me, I probably wouldn't have. So I think that we always have to speak the truth. We always have to, speak God's word. And, the word is the truth. We don't sugarcoat it. It is a baby, like at conception. And I don't know, but if you figure out a good way to do it, you're going to have to let me know.
Yeah, I think that is the struggle. Tyler, I'll let you go in a second. I just want to mention that we don't have time to get into all the different political views on how to deal with this situation, but we do. Generally, there is two. Like, one is saying we just need to deal away with the symptoms and take away the situations that put a woman in that place in the first place, and the other ones say, well, no, we need to legalize it. And sometimes I feel like, why not both? It should not be okay. It should not be legal. And at the same time, we do have to, minister these real needs and help proclaim the truth and help meet these needs and take care of these needs. And I don't have all the answers either, but sometimes I feel like, it has to be both, and both when it comes to proclaim the truth and loving them as well. It has to be both. And I don't know. I don't have the answers, but like you said, if you find someone who finds the perfect answer, then let me know as well. Tyler, go ahead.
There's a ministry in Travis, in our area, actually, that they do a wonderful job. I think this stat is correct. I've heard it a few times, but I believe it's between 80 and 85% of women that are considering an abortion that see an ultrasound ultimately end up changing their mind. I believe that stat is correct. So there's a ministry in our area that actually, that's like a big part of what they do. It's like helping the mother connect with the child in that way, and like showing that there is a bond there. There's something beautiful about this. And then also, this ministry is really doing a great job because they're helping connect these women with the resources they would need to care for the child, like diapers and like the things that cost money, and these resources and care. And there's counselors. I know my mom actually volunteered with them for a while doing the counseling with them. But there are some ministries like that in the area. But I think it's unfortunate that a lot of times you only hear about the supercharged political conversations around abortion rather than the ministries that are doing a really wonderful job, like the one, Sarah, that you're a part of, and this ministry in our area too. I'll give them a shout out, Chester County Women's Services. They're doing such a great job. But yeah, I think that I don't know if there's one right answer to this question, to this issue, but I think we have to start somewhere. It starts with a conversation. It starts with love and sensitivity, but also truth and meeting those needs.
Sarah, one last question, if you could help us work through what are some of the popular arguments that you've heard for abortion, especially in light of what you've gone through personally? Obviously, there's many of them and we don't have time for all of them. Maybe just the most common ones that you hear for, like abortion is just a women's rights issue or some of these other ones. And how would you comment on that?
Well, so I'm thinking of saying like it was better for probably you and the baby. You know, it was like, how are you going to raise that child? So to not bring the child into the world is probably the best thing for that child. So that justifies abortion. But, you know, what I would say to that would be like, what if somebody said that to you? Like, well, your mom just thought that, you know, you would probably have a better life if you weren't born. So, you know, and then I would just say that, like, because in this ministry, like, I always just kept hearing that, like, there's no support, like, from the father of the baby or like the family. Like, those are the women's main reasons for getting them. So I would just say that, like, if you can get connected to a local church and get like all of those needs met and more, because we know that a baby is an 18-year plus commitment. Like, just, you know, just because they're 18 doesn't mean that the commitment's over, but you're responsible for that adolescent and that child in that time period. You know, another one is just the my body, my choice thing. And it all comes down to like what that person believes in science. And I think science always points to that as a baby at conception. I think at like 42 or 49 weeks, like there's already a spine, there's already brain waves starting. I'm not a stats person like Tyler is. So, you know, I'm more of the on the emotional side of things.
Okay, we need that. We need that too, though.
But yeah, those are like the two big arguments. And, you know, people just, I think they're not willing to believe that it's a baby. And I don't know how we convince them that it is a baby. You know, when they can live, if they're born at what, like 22, 25 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, they say that it's not, you can abort if the baby is not viable outside of the mother. And, you know, how can you look at this baby and say that it's not a baby? Like, I get frustrated when I run into people like that on Facebook, and, you know, I've had to take a step back and stay away from that, because you can't reason with these people just because it's like become this, I don't know, like this cool thing to do. And now people are like videoing themselves, like having an abortion and just, you know, claiming women's rights. And
we've seen that happen like time and time again over history, right? That same argument that you mentioned, it's not a baby. You can even substitute, it's not a human. We've, as history has gone by, we've used that same argument to justify genocide on massive levels in 1930s Germany. Jewish people were not human, right? In 19th century America, African Americans, Black people weren't fully human. In 17th century in this land, Native Americans weren't human. And like, I feel like that argument, we see it come up over and over again to try to justify our position or justify our desire to do the things that our sinful flesh wants to do. But yeah, that it's just a crazy pattern that I've noticed.
I think it's, you know, a good example of the blind leading the blind, you know, and ultimately, you know, it's such a good picture of our depravity, you know, and ultimately they need scripture, they need God to open their eyes. It is frustrating when it even defies logic and common sense, and there's so many, you know, contradictions within their own arguments, like you said, pointing out, you know, even down to our laws of the land, a double homicide. Well, why is that? Because we view it as a life over here, and yet we don't over here. You know, learning.
Or the saying, if you don't like it, don't have one. You know, and how does that not equate to taking a life?
Yeah, and even within the medical field, my wife's a nurse, and you know, I was talking to her right there the other day, and how do medical professionals get away with this, and even like how do they live with it? Because, you know, as they take an oath, you know, not to cause harm, you know, that I don't know the exact verbatim, but you know, every nurse does, every medical professional does, and yet here they are, you know, often admitting, yes, it is some sort of life form, even if they don't call it baby. Most will admit when it gets down to it, this is a life, and they're causing it harm. It is frustrating, but ultimately they need the gospel, and they need God to open their eyes. It's amazing what
I gotta believe though, like most of the time, like just with what you were saying, with what society has put in the stigma of abortion and like just even children in general, like you got to think, are women that have abortions partially victims of this too, of the societal pressures to push them down that path and to make them think that there's no other way, when the church is sitting here like, we want to help. Well,
should be.
We would hope the church. Yeah, we would hope the church is
above
there.
Statistically, they are above the average citizen. But
so thinking through all of this, it's such a politically charged issue. It's an emotionally charged issue. And I think we forget often that the forgiveness of Christ is a real thing. And I think we let our anger and our emotions get in the way of really experiencing that, what you were talking about, that forgiveness and the love of the church and the love of Christ. And man, this has been such a great episode to think through. And I hope it gets our listeners to think about this. And because like we were talking off air, it can be so easy to discuss this topic just from a stone cold lawmaker, the political standpoint, rather than actually hearing testimony and getting down to the core of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder. Sarah, we're running out of time, but I did want to ask you, is there anything else that you want to say to our listeners, maybe thinking about different groups, like people who have gone through abortion or people who are thinking about it or arguing for or against it? Because you come with a unique perspective that not all of us have. So is there anything else you want to say to our listeners before we close out?
Yeah, so I would say to anybody who's thinking of getting an abortion, if you're sitting there tonight, and I just feel like I got to say this, if you're sitting there tonight and you're pregnant and you feel like tomorrow you have an appointment to go get an abortion, like from my experience, it will bring nothing but heartache. Like I regret mine. I would say to hold off, to don't do it tomorrow, or if you have an appointment for this week, I would say to reach out to a crisis pregnancy center and reach out to as many churches as you need to reach out to, get counsel, because it's not an easy fix. It's not a simple solution, I would say to a woman who has had an abortion that there is such thing as abortion PTSD. And I know that there are a lot of statistics on that, that, nightmares, anxiety, anger, depression, and you can have those symptoms for years. And things can trigger those symptoms of PTSD. You may see a newborn baby and be triggered. You might see an ad on TV and be triggered. There's billboards in Florida when you're driving down the interstate that have like, don't have an abortion, and then they have a picture of a fetus there. Like, you might see that and be triggered because of your abortion. And I would say to all of our listeners, to get together and work out something with your church, that like you can have a ministry at your church that can reach these women somehow, like whether you attach abortion like to your church name, like abortion care, like the way Assurance did, there's like a special way that you can use a Google search to bring up your organization, and to reach out to these women and give them love and support. And like, cause you gotta, like, this is a crisis when somebody's pregnant and they're thinking about an abortion. So you've got to like meet them like right away. Because we all know like the baby is growing every single week, and that person who's having the abortion knows that. And the bigger the baby, the more expensive it is and all of that stuff. And then I would say to pray for the organizations that are going through this, because they get smear campaigns against them. I didn't mention that earlier, but the place that I volunteer at, they will get people who will come in there, and they are not coming in there with good intentions. They are coming in there to get dirt off of the ministry.
Wow.
And they call there and they've had things done to them because they're protecting life. And, there's evil people out there who think that, they don't have the right to do that. And, it would be great to see more of these ministries come up. I would also give a shout out to Pat Layton's book, which is Surrender the Secret. You can get a group of ladies at your church together. If you know somebody who's had an abortion, you can get a group of women together and go through this book. It has everything lined out, and it happens in a linear fashion. So you're going through this process where you meet the other women who have gone through abortion, and then you're sharing your story, and then you go through the chapter on truth and what this really is, and then had it not been for this ministry, I wouldn't, I'd be beside myself. So I would say to get some kind of healing from this experience.
And we'll put a link to that book in our episode description. So if you're listening and you want a copy, just scroll down and you can find it there.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Sarah, thank you again so much for taking the time to join us on the podcast, being willing to do this and to share what you've been through with two guys you've never met and our listeners who you've never met. But it's so important for Tyler and I to hear, for our listeners to hear. We're praying that God will continue to bless you and the ministries that you're involved in. And to our listeners, thank you again for joining us on another episode of the Happy Holy Hour. Remember to subscribe, and leave a review wherever you're listening to this podcast on. If you're interested in learning more about us or want to take advantage of even more free content, you can go to www.thehappyholyhour.org for blogs, videos, free ebooks, discounts, and more. And lastly, if you would prayerfully consider financially supporting us on GoFundMe or Patreon. God has used this podcast to share the gospel with many people around the world and to encourage them to grow in their walk with the Lord. But it does cost money to produce this podcast, most of which right now is being funded by us producers. So if you would want to join us and support us in this way, we would really appreciate it. Thanks again. And until next time, grace and peace.